Infrastructure Committee meeting. This is actually the first committee meeting of this triennium. First time we've had a committee of the whole, so warm welcome to councillors, warm welcome to the staff and those in the public gallery. Mr. Holliston, I think you're it. We'll get on with the agenda as we'll work. The agenda as indicated, there's probably be no changes, except when we deal with the public exclude matter. I tend to sort of have a bit of a, perhaps suspend standing orders while in public exclude and just have a bit of a discussion, so get a bit of discussion so the issues can be dealt with. Right, we'll move on to, first item is apologies. I have apologies from Her Worship the Mayor, Councillor Rainey and Councillor Fulton. They're absent on council business with the Danish delegation. So I have someone to move that the apologies be received. Councillor Sanson, seconded Councillor Skinner. Those in favour will say aye. It's carried. Just confirmation that we're live stream. Be recorded, so just remember to turn on and off your microphones, and as you've been advised, they are quite sensitive, so they do pick up the side conversations. Recommendations when they go up will be on this one, and any changes will be also highlighted as well. If you're proposing any amendments, I've got one that Councillor Laurie is thinking about, but you could provide those in writing beforehand. And I said there's no change to any other items. Thank you for those who responded to the email about putting the questions in early to the officers. That's very, very helpful to the officers, and does actually help you with your role in governance, because they get a bit of heads up, you get a better answer, a more comprehensive answer, and helps you in your governance role. We've got a briefing at 12 o'clock on Saxon Creek, and there's a activity management plan workshop planned for 1 o'clock. Activity management is, I think that is...
So through the chair, the meeting is the strategic workshop, which will be led by Mr. Mark Trakirtha, and that'll be based on the assumptions on a whole range of things that we'll be using for our activity management plans. Yes.
To inform the... Councillor Skinner?
I may have to duck out for another council commitment at 11:15 for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes.
Okay. Anyone else need to be away, or any time constraints? Just remind any conflicts of interest, declared at the appropriate time, and just keep your interest up to date. I haven't been advised there's no public forum, so we'll go on to the chairperson's report. Take it as read, but again, a warm welcome to the members of the committee. The thing that I wanted to say is we've got to make a recommendation for Councillor Courtney to go for the accessibility for all, but in my chair's report I just thought we'd just focus on probably, there's lots of things we'll be required to do, but I thought the ones that the highlight will be the ones, issues that we're going to have to confront: climate change, sea level rise, and the vulnerable areas. And when we look at the horizon further out, there's quite a lot of thought needs to be given to the impact of sea level rise, climate change on our infrastructure, and where we will be building, delivering. The other one is water quality. There's the new freshwater standards coming out, and that's something we need to confront in terms of the standards for water quality. They've already announced that there is going to be an independent water regulator, but there will be standards for things like wastewater, stormwater and sewage as well. And I'd have to say that this community is growing increasingly, and basically sewage discharges into the Nelson Haven are intolerable. And that's a challenge for us. And the third one is around transport. We've got the public transport review, there's the speed limit review, and there is also the out and about policy, when we're going to have to confront the issue of micro-mobility options. So there's some big issues coming up that will probably take our time. So I'll take the report as read. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any questions. Councillor Courtney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious, page 10 in your report, 2.1.12, and it refers there to moving back in-house the management of the Nelson Regional Landfill business. Yep. A bit of background on that?
Well, essentially they are business units that they are co-managed with the TDC. As you'll be aware that the Sewage Unit Business Unit has some other major users, and iwi are represented as well. At the moment, the management is contracted out. We've just been brought, they will be brought back in and managed from here, but they still are their own business units, unless Mr. Levertis has anything he wishes to add.
No, through the chair, I think you've summarised it well. In short, the services for the general manager and the operations for the NRSBU and the regional landfill are currently managed by Becca on our behalf. I reported back to the last Works and Infrastructure Committee, and for the benefit of the new councillors, that was when I presented from memory, the previous business plan, where I gave an indication of why we were bringing those services back in-house. So it's a cost saving.
That's the answer I want.
It's a cost saving, yes.
And efficiencies? Mainly cost.
It's cost savings, and because we do the administering authority, the person will be sitting within our building, so there will be certain efficiencies. But I need to say that and the acting general managers in the public arena, and Mr. Don Clifford and Nathan Clark have done a very, very good job in managing those two business units for us.
Against, carried. Oh, and the other one we need to do is move that elected member to liaison role and to Councillor Mel Courtney to accessibility to all.
I was including that in the movement, so if Councillor Lord...
I said the chair's report, but I'll do it as a separate motion.
Okay.
Moved Councillor Edgar.
Seconded.
Yeah, seconded Councillor Noonan. No discussion. I'll put it, those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Right, next item is the council submission on proposed priority product and priority product steward guidelines, and I invite Ms. Lee to come forward and speak to her report. Or speak to the report. Well, Ms. Lee, take your report as read, but is there anything you wish to highlight or add, or any additions?
Kia ora. Through the chair, no, I have no additions to the report.
Quite happy to take any questions. Right, questions?
Sorry, through the chair, maybe I'll just also take the opportunity, for those of you who don't know Karen. Karen is an environmental program advisor. She actually works for a fellow GM. She works for Claire Barton, but she is very, very closely linked with the solid waste activities. So that's how Karen fits into the picture.
Right, thank you for that. Councillor Noonan.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. My question really is, with this new change, what is going to be, is there going to be an increased cost to the consumer? So if you would, for example, dumping tyres, they're not cheap to dump now. Would that be likely to increase? Because I know a lot of people sort of...
Through the chair, I think this is going to be part of the investigation for setting up an effective product stewardship scheme. The intention will be that the cost will be fairly distributed between manufacturers, distributors. There may be some small cost to the consumer, but the environmental outcomes, I think, will probably prove to meet the satisfaction of the public perception of how we deal with this waste.
Thank you for that. We don't want them dumping them over the bank, which is what they are tempted to do already, so thank you for that.
It's a retrospective approval, it's gone in, so. No other questions? Someone to move that we receive the report and approve retrospectively the submission signed by both us and the TDC. Councillor Sanson, and to move, Secretary, Councillor O'Neill-Stevens. No other discussion? I'll put it, those in favour will say aye. Against, carried. Thanks, Karen. Landfill Business Unit, Business Plan. Mr. Clifford.
And also take the opportunity, so Mr. Don Clifford is the acting General Manager for both the NRSBU and the Regional Landfill. And next to him is Mr. Andrew Bishop, who he works with Nikki and in the finance team. So if there's any questions based on finance, because we are the administering authority, he will answer those questions.
Morena, good morning. Nothing particular that needs pointing out. There's quite a lot of information in the reports, so hard to highlight one issue.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. One is possibly firstly to you, Andrew. Do we provide a letter of expectation or equivalent to the landfill business unit?
I don't think we have a letter of expectation. There is a MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, in terms of reference that they operate on it. It's a business that runs the landfill. It's jointly owned by the two councils. So, yeah, there's no letter of expectation, no.
Right.
That's all in the MOU.
Okay. So just the time frame on the plan is quite protracted. So it has to be prepared by 31st of October, the final by 31st of May. That's actually significantly longer than the NRSBU one, which is end of December through to March. And that's 6 months. You know, 6 months is a very long time in local government. Long time at all. And so there is a potential for quite significant changes between the draft that's been prepared and the final that comes through in May. Just wondering why the time frame is so different between this and NRSBU, and in itself why the time frame is 6 months, and just the potential impact that has on budgets, on deliverables, on the work that needs to be done, because there are highlights of quite a few things that have changed. And so I see that time frame as having the potential to have really impacted upon that.
So through the chair, yes. So it is accepted that the terms of reference for the regional landfill and the MOU for the NRSBU are not in sync. I think that's fair to say. However, what we try and do, and I work very, very closely with the acting general manager to ensure that all processes are aligned. And for example, that's why on this agenda you will have both business plans for both the NRSBU and the landfill and the annual reports. And when we present the activity management plans for the NRSBU, we'll be doing the landfill at the same time. But there are anomalies. I accept that. It would be good to actually align those, but we still ensure that the deadlines that we set for the NRSBU follow for both of them. But there are things that should be aligned.
But I guess the key question is that potential for significant change in that 6 month period from the draft through to the final, because it is a 6 months.
Perhaps I can just add some sort of operational view to that. We have quarterly meetings with the board of the business unit. So as the general manager, we do internal looking and considering of things that might need new budgets. Then I have to take that to a board meeting, get that approved, and then that needs to come to both councils. So part of that long period is to allow for those cycles of aligning meetings. So council needs to know, in the middle of the year for its funding and finances, so we need to sort of signal some stuff upstream as best we can. There is potential for change in that 6 month period, but we try to give heads up and work together along the way so that there's no surprises.
Thank you. And just my final question just relates to page 43 of our agenda, which is the business improvement plan. There's just a few two that are yet to start. I just think in the business plan, we need something a little more concrete. Which quarter of which year is it maybe due to start? I noted also on, you may not have seen it, but it was also within our agenda, which talked about the hail review. And so just wondered if that was should have been sort of in here as well, reflected through. But yeah, do you have anything further than yet to start?
It would be good to have some clear timing. For me, some of the uncertainty is around when the new staff are going to be starting. So I'm here temporarily, and it's unclear for me at the moment when the new staff are there. So for me to commit them to doing things I could do.
So this financial year?
Yes, would be. Which ones? Can you ask me those ones again?
Review landfill gas harvesting and emission studies and investigations.
Yeah, so reviewing the gas landfill, I've just started some work on that myself at the moment, and with Karen Lee, we're also looking at the other things at the moment, just starting.
And the further work on the hazardous activities and industries list sites. I see that it's within your work program, but not within here, not within the business plan. Is that because it doesn't fall within the current financial year?
It's just because I saw it as more of a task that the new staff will undertake rather than a big ticket item that needed funding.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Something of an operational question, if it's okay, through the chair. And you may not have the information to hand, so it's no problem if you don't. But looking at the landfill charges, the idea that the cost of bringing polystyrene to the landfill, it looks like it's going to go up to $2,180 a tonne. I was trying to picture a tonne of polystyrene when I read that. And then it got me thinking about, through the chair, about how we've brought in the single-use plastic bag ban, there's greater awareness about packaging and this sort of thing. Is any of that actually leading to less polystyrene, less single-use plastic, less of these sorts of things arriving at the landfill?
I'm not aware that it has yet. There's quite a lot of polystyrene comes from the construction industry, and it is an awkward thing to deal with at the landfill. So that's why that number seems high. But yes, a tonne is a massive amount of polystyrene.
So through the chair, if it's okay, how do you deal with polystyrene? Just put it at the bottom of the hole, or?
Broken up and put in the holes.
Okay. And sorry, I really hate polystyrene, so one more question if it's okay. How do you stop it from just blowing all over the place?
The operator does his best to stop it, but you know what polystyrene's like. It's not something you can totally control.
Yeah, it's awful. Thanks.
I think in the new year there'll be a visit to the landfill, so have you been up there? Yeah. For the new councillors, that's... Yeah. I know the GM Infrastructure is very proud of his landfill. And is there that we received the... Oh, Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. Hey, Cheers, I know we've gone through some of this in the past, and I appreciate your good work both of you have been doing, and Don and Andrew. With these costs, and people, public are going to see these costs have gone up across the board. And in the layman's terms, what's the reasons for these costs going up? I mean, I know we divest and digest all this, and we sometimes struggle with it and think, okay, that's fair enough, but for the public as well.
There are three main costs why they've gone up. The first one is we renewed the contract. That had been quite an old contract to manage the landfill, and the costs went up significantly. So I think the contractor had been hurting at the end of the last contract. So that's the first one. That was public tender, so it was competitive tender. The second one is the increase in the cost of carbon, the emissions trading scheme. That's gone up significantly. And the third one is my friend on the left here. Yep. So it's market forces and government-driven influence on the emissions trading scheme. So the only thing under our control is when we buy units. So we pre-purchase them to try and fix the price. So we're currently got a couple of years' supply of units. Well, effectively a hedge. It's because of our low cost of funds, it's cheaper to actually own them than to hedge them. We could buy futures for them, but it's just cheaper to own them.
Thank you. Very good. Very helpful.
Chair, are there comments to go back, or do you want to delete that clause?
No, through the chair, if there are any comments, I will take those on board, and then I will personally write to the GM reflecting what any of those comments that this committee, if there are none, then I will write back to the GM saying that there are none, and then that he can take it back to his committee and get a final approval before I bring it back here.
I think there's probably a comment from Councillor Eager, but
Yeah, I think the timings within the improvement plan absolutely need to be there.
that was the feedback I was thinking of based on those questions. See if we can, the alignment would be very, very helpful. Councillor
I'll just pick up two, following on pretty much what Councillor Edgar has been talking about, but page 40 of our report, 11 long-term capital program studies are required to scope all likely future capital works, both at East Valley and York Valley sites. Sitting here, I'd like to have had an idea when they were likely to start and which were taking priority, what ones are taking priority over others, and exactly, yes, a lot more information there I would have expected myself. Can anyone enlighten me, please?
We're looking for the consenting. Is that a question, I suppose what you're looking at is when the life or the airspace available at York Valley starts to come to an end? Are you looking at when the triggering is for...
If you want feedback, I'm looking at long-term capital programs there, the heading, and it says studies are required to scope all likely future capital works at both Eves Valley and York Valley sites. Well, starting date and what's taking priority over another, or what project is taking priority over another capital works.
Yeah.
Greater detail.
Yeah, okay, I'll get Mr Clifford to answer that one.
So, yeah, great question, and I can add some detail.
And I thank you for that. And I'm always frustrated when the costs. Every time you go to the dump and you take a trail load up and it climbs and climbs and climbs. And I understand, and everyone understands, there's a real cost in disposal. And once again, I appreciate all your work done, and I appreciate the work done on the table. And this recommendation coming back. Well, not coming back, going for the landfill business unit. And it's going back to us as an operation to see what improvements we can make, etc. But I'm going to take this opportunity really to bit of feedback for us and the public, because we're setting goals of trying to reduce our landfill waste by 10%, etc., which is great. But however ways we dice it and thrice it or do these reports, it's not going to happen unless the public actually reduce their consumption and waste. So this is an opportunity for us. Obviously, we put a commentary back, sort of inwards, but we've had this period of sort of climate extravaganza of recent weeks, but this is really putting it back on the public. We can do so much, but unless the public actually make an effort of 10% or more reduction of waste and consumption, this is all just talk and moving the sort of shell game around as such. So I very appreciate the diligence done, and I commend what we've done here, but I'm putting this weight back on the public now with climate extravaganza to make these moves, because reduction will only happen if Joe Bloggs or Jane Bloggs actually reduces that consumption.
So I should have asked you, are you speaking for or against the recommendation?
Well, I've made it very clear that I understand what we have to do, so there's a chance of commentary, but I do support it, and like I said at the beginning of my speech, I always struggle with upping costs, because there's a point you just can't keep throwing things away at those costs. So yes, I support it. I thought I made it quite clear, but it's like anything, it's not black and white, and it's a team effort, so the public need to come to the table, the public need to come to the score on this. Speaking for Mr. Chairman, thank you. It's interesting listening to Councillor Skinner's thoughts. I share many of them. Historically, waste is just something that went away, and we never thought, as New Zealanders, where it actually ended up. And we're being confronted every day now by that question: where does it go? What happens to it? What are the impacts of it? And just as there is no free lunch, there is no free waste disposal. And I would like us as the council to do more to explain to people that reality. And I'd like to see more being done by our comms team to explain why we have costs and why those costs go up. Because still for a lot of Nelsonians, it still just seems like a rort. And it's not, but it's beholden on us to communicate the reasons why. And I know we already do a lot of that work, but I would like us to do more.
I'll take the opportunity, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, on the back of the previous two councillors who I agree with, I think I'm looking at page 28 at the local disposal levy which we get, and part of that covers recycling, and I just think that people do not understand that when they put their bins out at the gate, the more times they put them out, the more cost there is. And I don't think there's a relationship between half bins and full bins. People put them out, I know they do, because I do have an interest in them, and I do check the odd one down the footpath, and I'm sure anybody else that's interested in recycling probably does too. And many of them are half full. Now, if people realise that when we put half full bins out, they have to be collected more often. And the dollars make that up. So my appeal is to people to put them out, and maybe we need to put it on our brochure, because it doesn't say only put your bin out, your recycling bin out when it is full, because they don't smell, because if you wash everything out as you should, then there's not a problem storing it. It can sit there for a long time. Personally, mine goes out about every 6 to 8 weeks, so it can be done. I'm happy to help. So if there's any advertising, marketing, washing of things, look, I'm happy to show people how to reduce their waste in the recycling, but they do need to know there is a cost. The more we collect, the more cost, and the more cost goes on the rates.
So there is, of course, quite a few additional costs coming through in this report. One of the key things that I just wanted to ask, I know there was an explanation about some of the work and the timing, is actually just the review of the AMP, and that it didn't appear to be reviewed alongside the LTP. So can I just have clarity on the timing of that, please?
I can comment on the AMP itself. I can't comment on the alignment of LTP because I'm not involved in your LTP process. But the AMP is something that we're working on at the moment. It needs quite a lot of improvement.
Right. Okay. So hopefully we'll have less of the variation going forward.
Yes, but I would say as a general comment, in my view, there's a lot that needs to be done.
Okay. And then just, there was a comment about the treated wastewater and investigations into the potential reuse. Are Sexton Field or Jubilee Park potential contenders for that?
All parks are potential users. At the plant, we're just going through procuring a filtration system that will allow us to use the treated wastewater on site. After we've done that for a while, we'll be able to test the quality over time of that water, and then we'll be able to consider other uses. There are two things around parks, is most parks only need water at peak dry periods, and they don't really use that much water. So yes, there's the potential, but we don't have pipe networks to take the treated wastewater to them yet. So that will be a secondary consideration.
Thank you.
But yes, we are hoping to find all sorts of uses for it.
Thank you.
I'm just curious to know, local disposal levy there, the LDL on page 28, 4.3. Is the sum received by each council? That's
You look at the right report. This is pages 47 to 49.
all right, okay, fine. Yeah, that's right. No, fine.
Any other questions? Question I have, Mr Clifford, is you had the resource consent hearings this week. Is that likely to have any impact on your business plan?
Great question. So it's a guesstimate on my view then, because we're some way away from the commissioners making a decision. They can impose conditions. So it's me reading body language as much as anything. I think that the business plan anticipates most of it, but there is some potential risk that they might ask for higher standards or something else which we haven't budgeted for yet.
So we're expecting a decision, what about in February, March?
I would anticipate end of February, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, through the chair. On the back of your question, do you anticipate any increased capital costs as a result of that then, of any imposed conditions?
It's possible. I don't anticipate anything too significant because we have tried to anticipate where we would head and the sorts of things that would be needed. But I can't prejudge their decision.
And so once that decision is made, we will probably hear through council what implications that was going to have and any changes to your budget that you might need?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
I suppose the comment that I would make, the second part of the recommendation is that we'd probably expect to have some changes as a result of those changes to the business plan as a result of those, when the decision from that resource consent hearing is known.
Yes, certainly if the commissioners impose conditions which have significant costs, then the business plan will need to be revisited. The alternative is that we'll just be confirming the current business plan.
Thanks. Any other questions? Any comments from the board? No comments. Well, the recommendation is that we receive the report and provide any comments back to the Acting General Manager. It's the two of them, so someone to move?
Yeah, and I assume that the comments would be the results of the hearings and what implications they would have. Were there any others?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay, I'm happy to move.
Yeah, so it's been moved Councillor Noonan, seconded Councillor Edgar. Any discussion or any debate? There being none, I'll put it. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, carried. A bit more enthusiasm. Right, annual report for the business sewage business unit. Welcome, Mr. Clifford. Mr. Bishop. Right. Take it. What pages are we at? Pages
73.
73. Very much a retrospective view of the world. Anything you wish to highlight, or any highlights, lowlights?
What makes good reading for everyone who's interested. I think the key message is that the operations and maintenance costs were higher than budgeted. There's a lot of maintenance that we've been doing to improve things, and as also discussed, the cost of the external management being different to what had been anticipated when there were staff. So there are things to note there. As far as capital expenditure, we didn't do some things, so compared to the plan, there wasn't as much spent on capital. For example, we didn't desludge the ponds during that year, which was quite a big chunk of the proposed budget. So that is going to be happening soon.
Right. Opportunity to be a test at the end of this. Okay, no questions? Councillor Moon?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just regarding the desludging, so on page 61 where it says the budget estimated cost was $750 for partial desludging, are you saying there was no desludging or there?
You're jumping back to the next year's business plan. So there was no, for the annual report, that's a backward look.
Right,
Business plan.
so it's going to be done next
financial year.
next year? Okay, thanks. Mr Chair, just one question about the recommendation. It seems, I'm just wondering about the rationale of having 1 and 2. You're receiving the business unit annual report and the attachment, and then you're receiving the same report as a second bullet. I'm just wondering what the rationale of, is there some reason why, or can we not wrap it all up in one?
Do away with the second one?
No, through the chair then.
There's a reason.
We were just having the debate there. So the first item, when we receive the report, we're actually receiving the full report with its attachment, so it's an administrative thing. The second item actually the committee has to receive the actual annual report, so they are standalone and they are required. And they are different.
Okay. Councillor Sanson?
Thanks, through the chair. On looking at page 80, I just had a question, the third table down, medium suspended solids and discharge, and the, I guess the rate or the graph shows significantly higher levels for 2018-19. I just wondered if there was any particular reason for that. Was the desludging or the non-desludging to do with that, or?
I'm not an operations engineer, so this is my understanding of this rather than a precise scientific answer. But broadly speaking, we had more algae growing in the ponds as a result of drier weather, and so there were more suspended solids in the outflow.
So just to clarify, so it's algal solids, is it? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Questions, I'll someone to move the 2 recommendations that we received report and also received the annual report. Councillor Sanson, second Councillor Stevens.
Nothing particularly exciting, no.
benefit of the committee, could perhaps just do a brief introduction of who you are and the part of the business that you look after.
Kia ora, I'm David Light. I'm the business unit manager of the utilities team. So my unit looks after the day-to-day operations of the water, wastewater and stormwater and flood protections, as well as that activity management planning. So we do the big picture thinking as well as the day-to-day management.
Thanks for starting.
Tēnā koutou, my name is Lois Plum. I'm the business unit manager for the capital projects team. So we're the delivery part of the business and deliver the infrastructure projects via the annual plan and long-term plans.
Kia ora, I'm Marg Parfitt. I'm business unit manager for transport and solid waste. So in the transport space, that includes all of our roading network, our street lighting network, our traffic signals, our structures, retaining walls, bridges. Solid waste is around the transfer station at Pascoe Street and the recycling contracts, as opposed to the separate business units that you've just been hearing about.
Take the report as read. Hopefully the questions that the councillors have put in have been circulated, so perhaps if you just present your report and then perhaps respond to the questions as you're working your way through. I'm not sure who's the batting order. Okay.
Thank you, through the chair. I'd just like to make a couple of highlights for you because we do some really good things as well. Really pleased to confirm that our Saltwater Creek Bridge, which I'm sure many of you walked over recently, was completed through the last quarter. It's not only beautiful, but it's increased the level of service across there, so we were very thrilled to have that in place. We're also, through this quarter, excited to say that finally we've got a finalised resource consent for stage 3 of the Saxton Creek upgrade, and also got the final landowner over the line to agree with what we require, which is fantastic. Since the quarterly report was done, I can also let you know that a couple of jobs that we've been doing through the first quarter have been completed, and that's the Tui Glen water main replacement project. That was to put in place a high pressure new pipe so that fire flows in that area are now adequate. And we also finished Nayland Road, Galway Street stormwater upgrade, and that was particularly needed for a couple of properties that were continually being flooded in that area. So some nice little highlights from the month. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering whether the staff want to go over the update first on the operating expenditure.
So,
Water supply.
So through the chair, yeah, so we had incorrectly put in basically we'd repeated the graph on page 143. It was the same as the graph on 142. So we were just providing the correct graph that should have been put in its place. There's not much really to talk about. I would say most things are generally tracking within our overall year to date.
So sorry, which page did that replace?
Page 143.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just realised that, I mean, if it's a replacement to 143, I see that wastewater is sort of a lot different from the previous. I'm just wondering if the staff would like to comment on that. And the unsubsidised roading has really changed.
So through the chair, I would just like to clarify the previous graph was for other operating revenue, so it wasn't, and what we're now showing is operating expenditure, so they were totally different.
So it's not really a replacement? It says it's a replacement.
So
is it not? It's an additional.
Yeah, the graphs were. So on page 142 and 143, they're exactly the same graph. One is for income, and the other one was meant to be for expenditure, and they've just been mistakenly put in both. The same graph had been mistakenly put in.
Okay, I think what's happening is that the one that was in our reports has in brackets excluding internal interest, and this one does not, so then we were thinking it was something else. Thank you. It's the internal interest addition that was fooling us, so we need to cross that out. That's right. If it's a straight swap, that's fine. My questions related to the recommendation to council regarding the increase, or I presume it's unbudgeted funding for those 1, 2 and 3. Am I right about that in the first place? I think it's Lois. So it's the St Vincent sewer, the Saxton Creek upgrade, and the railway reserve, so additional funding being sought for that. Was that all unbudgeted? 136.
Through the chair, each is slightly different. So the Saxton Creek, yes, there has been an increase in expected costs now for that we're going into stage 3. Some of that funding, there is additional funding, and there's also bringing back some funding that we had pushed out previously. In that project, St Vincent Street, yes, that is additional funding required due to an increase in costs. And the other one was?
Railway Reserve, 89.
Through the chair, so that is due to some increased costs around the project, but it's being funded from the low cost, low risk bucket of money, so it may not require additional funding or push something else out of that allocated budget, and it is an NZTA subsidy will be applied for.
Okay, great. So going back to, if I may, Mr Chair, to item 2, which is the Saxton Creek, the 2.1, so that funding is being brought, it's being moved from one year to the other, is that right?
So I think the best way I can explain it is, if you go to page 189, so through the chair, you'll see the one-page summary. So there's a few things that have gone on. It's slightly complex with the Saxton Creek, just due to the LTP timings and annual plan changes. So I just want to talk through a little bit there, because there what may appear to be an anomaly, but I just want to talk it through. So at the bottom, you have the financial sections there, and then you have the long-term plan budget, which had 2.795 million, and then 367,000 in the following year, 1920. Through the annual plan changes and the carryover report, we reduced the 18-19 budget down by 2 million, if you may recall that. And effectively, we just were only able to push out a certain amount of money into next financial year. So we ended up moving out 932,000. So effectively, we had reallocated the remainder of that money, which is in the order of just over $1 million, into 2021. But we're not able to finalise that because it was through an annual plan process. So we only have the luxury of changing next year, not the year after.
So that's why it's coming here?
So there's a reason why you might say that we compare the LTP budget of saying there's an increase in 1.8 million against the LTP budget, but in reality we're requesting more than that when you read the recommendations. Then the mere fact of that is because we effectively lost $1 million when we pushed out the project because of the timing of the LTP versus the annual plan.
Because you can't request that at that time?
The following year. So if everything had gone to plan and everything was perfect, we would actually be requesting $1 million for next year, regardless, because that money had already been moved out. So whatever would have happened, we'd always be requesting additional money, but that would be in line with what was in the LTP. It is slightly confusing. I apologise if I haven't explained it that well.
It's a nightmare. So through the chair, is that an impact on rates, or is that a debt? It's capital works, isn't it? So it's
through the chair, it's a capital.
Okay, so it's not straight onto rates. So I guess over the 3 recommendations that we're looking at, I want to know how much of that total, if any of that's unbudgeted, or that you've either rearranged the year that it is, so it's been approved but we're changing when it's happening, or whether it's new money. I think the 89 is, but I think Marg's explained that. So it's probably the St Vincent's sewer might be the problem, is it?
So through the chair, so technically I would classify them all as being new money.
Yes. Okay. So, through the chair, or maybe a question to the chair or the group manager, Nikki's sitting there, I'm just wondering what impact, or whether we need to have any concern about the rearrangement of the funds, what impact it may have on other years. And if I've got that, then I'm probably happy.
So, through the chair, the additional funding that's been requested for the current year, because we're so early in the year, we wanted to request it as additional funding, and we're really clear about that approval process. But there are likely to be other projects that will slip during the year and effectively create that funding. So we won't end up over our capital budget because of these. But it is an approval that needs to be done at council, because they are actually an increasing of the budget. In terms of next year's program, the fact that we are actually asking for additional funding for the Saxton upgrade, when we bring you the capital program for the annual plan workshops in December, we will right-size the program to include that. As you'll remember, we try and stick to a 40 to 45 million capital program, so there will be a right-sizing to accommodate that amount of expenditure.
So you're comfortable? That's what I want to know.
Yes.
Thank you, because it's the advice of the officers I need.
I suppose the question you've got is what's not going to happen?
Well, one of the things that does worry me is the Moddlers Pond, which apparently is now sitting unbudgeted work, which...
It's in Parks and Rec.
It is, but, you know, it's all one council. But it does concern me that we haven't got that budget sorted.
No, through the chair, when, as Nikki Harrison indicated, when we work through the annual plan, those issues will be discussed and included as funding will be included for all of those projects, and they will be debated around this table. So even though the Moddlers Pond doesn't sit in infrastructure, it's not lost in terms of the total picture. It is on our radar.
Thank you. And I guess what I'm saying, Mr. Chair, is that we need to think about other major projects that are not budgeted for yet when we're looking at all budgets. Are there any others that the staff are aware of that we haven't got in front of us today, apart from the Moddlers Pond? Maybe you don't need to articulate them, but just an indicator?
Off the top of my head, and we have been sitting in annual plans for the last 4 or 5 days. I don't think there's anything that, and you know, you asked the question, and Nikki said that she didn't have any concerns, and I'll add my, I don't have any concerns to that either.
Thank you.
Answer.
Mr. Chair, those were my questions. I realise the Mayor sent some through. I don't know how you want to address that. I've got them here if you want me to run them through later, but maybe go to others first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Noonan has already raised substantive part of my questions. I still have a concern that it is so early in the financial year. We are asking specifically for additional funding. We're not asking for funding to be reallocated from other projects, which there was an inference that that is possibly what's going to happen. We'll have savings downstream from later on in the financial year, but that's not what we're being asked for in these resolutions. We're actually quite specifically being asked for additional funding, and even with the Railway Reserve one, and I did note that council's contribution may only be 45,000, but again, we are approving 89. I'm just wondering why that is the resolution so early on in the financial year and not a reallocation.
So through the chair, we when there's an over expenditure on a particular, and Nikki, please help me if I'm giving the wrong advice. When we So each of these projects, we've actually brought to this committee and a recommendation to council because they are additional expenditure to get these projects started as a result of tenders or as a result of the work that is underway. We don't have the ability to take monies from within the activity unless they genuine savings. And at this stage, because we're only 5 months into the financial year, we're unable to ascertain whether there will be savings on any particular job. So for us to start moving money around within the activities is a little bit short-sighted at this moment in time. Potentially when we do our next quarterly report, we'll be in a better position. But at this moment in time, we can't identify any genuine savings that we can offset this expenditure on. And that's why we have to go to council to get approval to get these projects started so we can actually get that money. We don't have this money in our budgets. Nikki, have I...
So through the chair, I think, yes, you've answered it. I mean, the way that I was saying is that given the timing in the year, we know there will be projects that will get deferred through the next quarterly report and through the annual plan process that will effectively fund these differences. But we want to be explicit in these budgets. We are asking for additional money.
So just two things in follow-up to that. So firstly, I noted that the important considerations for decision-making sheet was missing. And so, of course, that has financial impact. And so I would have anticipated, firstly, that sheet should be in any report, but especially one with the potential of a significant financial impact. And so possibly some of this could have been addressed through that. Because I just think it would have been good to note specifically in the report, and maybe it can be noted in the record that, you know, even though this is capital spending, debt still has an impact. So yes, while there won't be a rates increase as a response to this, I absolutely understand that. I think it is prudent to be able to explain those next steps, those other aspects of it, rather than, as the report reads, it is just about additional funding and a lot of the information being supplied here verbally, I feel should have been reflected in the report, but at very least needs to be reflected through into the minutes.
So through the chair, yes, I do agree with you, Deputy Mayor. The normal quarterly report would not normally ask for money, and I think we've left the for quarterly reports that have just been received, we leave out the important considerations. So we will note that for future reference, that we re-include those when we're asking for additional money. I think you're correct.
Thank you. And so just with the unders and overs, looking at the P&L, just wondering if there's ever any reforecasting that comes through. I know there was a lot of detail provided, but all the detail sort of served to do was go, yes, this is under, that's over, this is under, that's over. But what that means in the bigger picture, and if there's ever any sort of reforecasting of those activity areas.
So through the chair, for the first quarterly report, we didn't do a reforecast, but we are doing a reforecast at the moment, which forms part of our annual plan process, and that'll be reflected in the second quarterly report. Where we have specific things that don't happen, like for example, you know, grossing up of the NZTA contract or things like that, we will actually, as part of this reforecasting, make operating budget adjustments so that they don't keep popping up in your commentary, just to sort of smooth it out. But then obviously when we get to annual report, we have to report back against the original budget.
Great.
But we do try and minimise repetitiveness.
Thank you. Just with some of the projects and possibly St Vincent Street sewer renewal in particular, it talks about the pipe diameter increasing to allow for future development. I was just wondering if DC's development contributions are being applied towards this?
Through the chair, I raised that question because I didn't know the answer till this morning. The DCs are actually done through the LTP process, so not particularly at this point, but when the next LTP is done, they look at all the projects that have occurred, add them all up, and their percentage against the DCs going forward is set at that time. So this will be included in the next round, but it won't necessarily change anything this year, etc.
Okay. And finally, just in regards to the Champion Road underpass, one of the questions that was asked by the chair of Regional Transport Committee and Works and Infrastructure, as it was then, was about whether the modelling for the crossing across Champion Road East included an operational supermarket. And I'm just wondering if you did receive an answer from Tasman District Council on that. And in particular, my concern is that some of the modelling, of course, has a smoothing, and here is average numbers, yet we all know around Christmas time, the, supermarket use is extremely high, but if I look at that intersection, you also go at summertime, there's lots of people using Saxton Field, there's lots of people using the Aquatic Centre, etc., etc. And so did that modelling take place? Because I have real concerns about what they're proposing there as it relates both to safety and then also the impact on the 3 roundabouts.
Through the chair, we did request from Tasman District Council, had they considered the knock-on effect, particularly the other 2 roundabouts, the ones on State Highway and further north on Main Road Stoke. We didn't get a response to those questions. The report that went up to the Tasman District Council says that traffic modelling on the roundabout in question at Champion and Salisbury Road, that the modelling indicated that if the crossing point was situated 20 metres back from the roundabout on Champion Road, that the level of service required with the roundabout upgrade, so regardless of the underpass, the roundabout is being upgraded, does meet the required level of service under the resource consent, and that did factor in an operational supermarket. I can't answer the question about seasonal averages, but the operational supermarket was taken into account in the modelling.
Right, I will continue to be concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to, through to Officer Payne, have some answers in respect of the in respect of Saxton Creek upgrade. We're being asked here for 700,000 for the 2019-20 and 2,100,000 for the 2020 and 21. What is good? You see, you look at the long-term plan budget for this project, and it was 2.795 million 598, and we're being asked for almost the same amount additional funding here. So, what has gone wrong with this project?
Through the chair, Downers were actually awarded the original contract back in 2015, and it was based on completing the entire works between Champion and Main Road Stoke in 3 stages. So the first 2 stages have been completed, this is the 3rd. We've had some rather frustrating delays around land agreements and getting resource consents. The land agreements have taken over 4 years, and they've delayed the stage 3 work until now. As a result of that, we had to go back to Downers just in the last month and a bit. Now we've got all the agreements in place, and asked them to reconfirm and submit a price for stage 3. There's been some major changes introduced through that period of delay, and they've include, which is causing a lot of the problem, more stringent environmental requirements, increased health and safety requirements, changes to bridge design standards, and a need to change the construction methodology following the completion of the multiple adjoining developments, including the nearby Somerset. There's also been a substantial change in our contracting sector workload during that period, as we all know. As a result of that, they returned a cost well above our budget. But we've done quite a lot of comprehensive assessment of those costs because we went, and then went through that. We've independently repriced the work now. We've had a senior ex-contractor look at the pricing for us to review it. And we've also had a number of conversations with Downer about opening their books, telling us how they've brought all those costs together to make sure that what they were doing was appropriate. The biggest items of change are cut to waste, the bridge, new riprap, and environmental controls and the creek works. We note that they have not excessively loaded any of the prices and all the productivities actually look good. We also went back and compared their pricing to recent civil works that we've received tenders for and completed those projects, and their submissions also in line with that recent pricing.
So if I can follow on with a follow-up question to Officer Plum. So Downers for stage 3 are actually repricing the work, that you're not holding them to their original price?
We needed to reconfirm, through the chair, sorry, we needed to reconfirm their pricing because of the timeline, and the original contract was in staged approaches, so they have the ability to resubmit. It was much higher than expected. We expected it to be more CPI adjustments through those years, but there's justifiable change in the expectations of what they had originally priced to now. So it's an increase in scope, predominantly around the extra bits and pieces that they now have to do.
What's happening there is looking fantastic. I mean, the work in progress. When is it going to be finished? Well, what finishing date?
Through the chair, we have to start first to get the stage 3 completed.
2015.
True.
You're not predicting, you know, it's...
The next bridge will start. We've got
2022, I see, is when you want the funds, 2021, so...
That is correct.
Yes.
21-22 will be finalised.
Through the chair, what lessons have we learned from this project?
Through the chair, that land negotiations are very tricky. They've taken much longer. It always does cause us a problem, but in this case we've ended up with people moving on, so we've had second lots of landowners and in some cases third lots of landowners that we've then had to go in and negotiate. And those level of time delays in today's market and today's changing environments increase costs.
Thanks, Chairman. First of all, can I say, whenever I hear the name Officer Plum, I feel like I'm in an Enid Blyton story. I'm sure there's an Officer Plum in a Famous Five adventure. Or
Cluedo.
Cluedo, Bruce Plum. All right. It's bringing back a lot of memories, happy ones too. I've got a number of questions, Mr. Chairman, starting with on page 150, the 6.4, we've already been discussing at the Champion Road roundabout and underpass matter. I read in the Nelson Mail that the TDC had voted to put the underpass on the back burner, was the word that I read, but I suspect it meant actually history, make it history, and go with the raised pedestrian crossings instead. So does that change anything that's in this report?
Through the chair, the communication we had from the Tasman District Council was that in order to provide a safe crossing point sooner rather than later, an at-grade crossing point needed to be progressed because that's what the business case showed, that's what NZTA would fund. That doesn't preclude them doing an underpass at a later date, and they are in negotiation with Woolworths to secure some land and easement so that that could happen in the future. So it was a matter of the supermarket wanting to open a very low level of service, if you've ever tried to cross there at the moment, needing to be addressed sooner rather than later. The way to do that, which met safety audit and traffic modelling was an at-grade crossing at this point with a view to perhaps an underpass in the future. So that doesn't really change anything that's in the report, except...
Okay. So through the chair, the money that we've earmarked for that work, what happens to that money?
So through the chair, the money that we have earmarked for this is in two parts. There's the 150,000 that council had committed to upgrade the roundabout capacity. That remains. That was the first part of the agreement. You may recall Tasman District Council came back to us after that agreement and said, we'd now like to put an underpass in and we need some help. And council resolved to fund an additional $320,000 to support the underpass. Now that Tasman District Council is going away from an underpass, that $320,000 will be a saving. It wasn't an effect on rates, it was a loan funded capital expend, so it will be a saving.
Okay, and through the chair, just looking at the Nelson Mail story, I understand that NZTA they're not going to fund the underpass?
So through the chair, the business case that Tasman District Council put up, the business case showed that an underpass wasn't the best and most cost-effective solution. That there was another alternative, an at-grade crossing, which is a pedestrian cycle crossing where they have priority, that met the levels of service and was more affordable than an underpass. So an underpass, because of the costs, that made the increased cost due to waterproofing and changing services around underground, meant that business case didn't stack up.
So through the chair, doesn't that go back to what I was saying earlier, that the underpass is basically finished?
I suspect through the chair there'll be a period of monitoring. I mean, if they find that the at-grade crossing is not working and that the level of service with roundabout capacity is dramatically affected, then it will need to be re-looked at.
Okay.
But I'm not saying it's dead in the water.
Okay, cool, thank you. Great explanation. Next, on to page 152. Through the chair, the Railway Reserve Princes Drive crossing. This caught my eye, 6.12. We're told that the shortfall in budget for the civil works tying the approaches into the new underpass is $89,000, and if the NZTA subsidy is approved will result in a net council share of $45,000. The reason I raised an eyebrow when I read this is the developers are paying for the traffic lights that is part of this this development, and through the chair, I'm just curious as how come they're paying for the traffic lights, but they're not paying for what's going to be the changes necessary to the railway reserve for it to continue to be a place for people on bicycle and on foot?
Through the chair, this one has quite some history, and I am going to be giving a briefing on this Coastal Views Waimea Road intersection at the conclusion of this meeting. But in answer to your question, which I think is why is the developer not paying for this? Right. The original consent to the subdivision had the road from the subdivision coming down at a different location onto Waimea Road. It was closer to Beatson Road. There was some negotiation and agreement very early on in the piece, back in the early 2000s, that adjusted that. It was a variation to the consent that brought the road out to where it is now. In the first version, the road did not cross the railway reserve, right? But the position of it added a potential impairment to any future southern arterial corridor that may or may not have gone through there. So an agreement was reached that the road would come out, this access road would come out onto Waimea Road, which preserved the future arterial corridor. And in that agreement, it was that Nelson City, because it was now crossing the railway reserve, in order to preserve the future corridor, Nelson City Council would pay for the crossing point, whether it was an underpass or an overbridge or whatever. That's the agreement. In the resource consent, it is now a condition of the consent that Nelson City Council will pay for the crossing point across the railway reserve. And in future, should the arterial southern corridor go ahead, NZTA would meet the cost of any future changes. So it's historic.
So through the chair, initially the road coming down from the retirement village was going to go down near Beatson Road. Were they going to pay for the traffic lights there?
through the chair, at that stage, I don't think traffic lights were required. There have been so many variations and so many consents involved in this, which is why I'm giving you a separate briefing on it later on.
So through the chair, had the road gone down to Beatson Road, which is where the developers originally wanted it to go, there'd be no traffic lights and we wouldn't be having to pay to save the railway reserve for pedestrians and cyclists. Is that right?
Yes.
I can't speculate on what may or may not have been. I can talk about what the situation is now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parfitt. Okay, my next question is, that is very interesting. My next question goes to page 156. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence in letting me ask all these questions. 8.3, the Waimea Road speed limit change. I was very encouraged to read that there have been fewer crashes in the area since we reduced the speed limit, which is fabulous news. But the police did raise the point that it's a little bit confusing because there is a passing lane remaining. So what thoughts do you have about the future of that passing lane, through the chair?
So through the chair, that will be addressed when the design for the traffic signals coming out through Station Road, the ones we've just been talking about, those passing lanes will go as part of the design for that intersection.
They'll go as part of the design? Okay, interesting, thank you. And also now to 8.4, I was thrilled to read with regards to the trial closure of the Hampden Terrace Waimea Road intersection. Thrilled to read that in the report, it is noted that there has been an unexpected amount of good feedback from residents, pedestrians and cyclists. Can you tell us a bit about that feedback, please?
Certainly, through the chair, we've received a number of emails from particularly people who live in Hampden Street West itself, commenting on how people are talking to them about how much more comfortable and safe that crossing point feels. There's some anecdotal evidence of more people out walking and socialising in the street than had been in the past. This is unsolicited. These are just emails that we received. We also had an email from a person in Alfred Street who made comment about how quiet the road appeared, and we're monitoring Alfred Street because it still could be a through route for traffic, but she had noted that and I use her word, boy racer activity seemed to have dropped off, and that instead of being awoken in the morning by loud vehicles, she was awoken by the sound of children walking to school.
Oh, result. That is great. And through the chair, have you had any correspondences from people who had expected it to be a problem and had discovered it was they changed their mind about the initiative?
Through the chair, no, we've sort of had radio silence on that really, so we haven't had anybody contacting us saying this is creating a problem for them, but we haven't had people who thought it would be a problem coming to us saying, oh, well, actually, I was mistaken.
Awesome. Best thing ever.
Yeah, so silence at this stage.
Okay, thank you very much. That's really good news. And my last question is regards to page 170. And again, I appreciate all these, that I'm allowed to ask all these questions. And it's about the Anzac Park to Maitai walkway link. And I have no idea what that's going to look like. And I was wondering if you could paint us a little picture, please, through the chair.
Through the chair, yes, it's from Parapara Road, where the Maitai shed path will come along the Parapara Road, and where there is currently a free left turn into Parapara Road, that will go. So the intersection will become just a crossroads without the free left turn, and then the cyclists and walkers will cross at the signalised crossing onto the small triangular island on the corner of Anzac Park, and then between that island and Anzac Park will be another, what we call a raised pedestrian cycle priority crossing, similar to what is proposed for Champion Road. Yeah, so that's what that will look like.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Marg. I don't know whether this is your one, but I'm going right back to page 137, the Saltwater Creek Bridge work completed. Very good feedback about the planting, the tidying, the finishing of that job. had contact from people who would know these things, very much aware of construction and so forth, have mentioned to me that the timber strips are showing signs of cracking and splitting on the sides of that bridge. So could someone have a look at that, please? Have you got a comment, have you?
Through the chair, I think that has been raised, and one of our staff has been down, and it's the normal wear and tear of the wood, where there is no concerns being raised at this stage in terms of any concerns about what the bridge is doing.
So it won't deteriorate further in their judgment?
Through the chair, that's correct. We will keep an eye on it though.
Thank you. And a follow-up to Marg, I'd like some more information on the Innovative Streets program that you've employed a consultant to do some work on. How's that progressing? That'll please a lot of people because traffic is a real concern in some of the neighbourhood streets at the moment.
Thank you. Through the chair, well, we have a consultant lined up. We haven't actually signed an agreement with them yet to commence this work because we're just in a discussion with the New Zealand Transport Agency to confirm the funding pathway. So basically that means which bucket of money do we take it out of. But we certainly have a very engaged community in Kaupai Street and some good ideas. What's proposed, you may recall, Mrs Claire Scott came and presented some ideas to Council, and that's very much in line with what NZTA's Innovative Streets is about. Low cost, kind of rapid interventions. But before we can really crack on with that, we just need to do a couple of sense checks. We need to go back and talk to all of the residents in Kauai Street and make sure that they're on board with this. So we heard from a group of them, but we need to engage with that entire community and in fact the surrounding streets, because whatever we do on Kauai Street will have a knock-on effect. We know this from Hampden Street. So we've got to go back and just sense check the problem. We call it doing a business case, and then some, in the new year now, some engagement with that community and get some ideas about what the interventions might look like, and that's where the consultant is going to help us. Yeah. So it's happening, but it's just not happening quite as fast as we would have liked because we're pending some confirmation from the New Zealand Transport Agency around funding.
Thanks, Mr Chair, and through you, just to make it, again, this is a trial. You'd class it as a trial even if you proceed?
Through the chair, Innovative Streets are a trial in the big sense of the word, but this would certainly be the first for Nelson, yes.
And if it's successful, you'd follow it, carry it through? Have you got any other areas in mind? Any other?
Well, it's a trial, and it's an approach that we will probably come back and talk to you as a council around when we do our activity management planning for transport, because this kind of intervention could be across a lot of local residential streets. But the Innovative Streets concept is trial it, use low-cost, rapid interventions to check that you're doing the right thing before you launch into something more major, more permanent.
Just a couple of other questions. Just back to the Saxon Creek upgrade, and mainly because of the amount of money that's involved. There's probably a couple of questions I probably want to ask. Is the original resource consent still current, or do we have to apply for a new one?
Through the chair, no, we have just received the resource consent. We had originally, when we did stage 1 and 2, they had different resource consents that were confirmed. This is stage 3 resource consent, and we just had that approved in the last few weeks.
So that's a new
correct
new one. So I'm looking at your explanation that in 6.1 on page 151, you sort of highlighted all the drivers of the cost increase. Are those costs being able to be split out, or are they identified? Can they be identified?
Through the chair, yes, they can. We have done the identifications through going back over Downer's contract and where those increases came, which was what I explained before. Predominantly they're in the cut to waste, the bridge, the rip-rap and the environmental controls work.
Yeah, so there is a dollar figure attached to those?
Correct.
Okay. And the other one is in terms of financial affordability, that was part of the documentation that you did for the LGA to put it into next year's AP.
So through the chair, for the annual plan, we've taken into account these changes through our reviews of in the annual plan. So we're aware of the costs and they've been included when we debate it or discuss it in December time, I believe. Those same figures will be, you'll see here, will be in the annual plan along with all the other budgets.
Now, what's the contingency? Is the contingency all used up, or is it?
Through the chair, the original budgets that were done back in 2015 had a 5% contingency associated with them. This one has a 10% request where we believe we may be able to make some savings, but through the process. So it is now set at 10%.
And do we get any DC contributions?
So through the chair, historically we have had DCs from the Saxon Creek upgrade, and as Lois pointed out previously, it will be done as in the next phase of the LTP phase, so it will be reset and included there as well.
Excellent. Any other questions?
Thank you. You've obviously asked the mayor's questions, which I've been looking at on my phone. Just a clarification really through the chair. At page 151, which the chair has just been discussing, the last sentence of the penultimate paragraph says the approved budget for the Saxton Creek upgrade is 3.1, so an additional 1.8 million is required. But it doesn't really reflect that in the recommendation, so it's left me a little bit confused. So
through the chair, I'll talk to that. So when I spoke earlier and I drew us back to page 189, I tried to make reference to that anomaly. So if you look at the LTP budget on the back of 189, it says long-term plan budget 2.7 million or 2.8 million, let's say, and 370,000. So that equated to being around about 3.163 million that was allowed for in the LTP. If you look at what we're now requesting based on the total budget, it's coming to around about 3.16, it's coming to 4.965 million. The difference between that is 1.8. The problem we have is when we change budgets through the annual plan, because of the delays that were happening, we lost to basically $1 million because of the annual plan, because we can't change it in the future years.
wow,
So that's
a risk, isn't it?
So, as I said previously, if this project had been going to plan and was within budget, we'd be sitting here now saying we'd be requesting 1 million, which would be in order and align with our LTP budgets. So it's just due to the, Councillor Courtney asked lessons learned, due to protracted negotiations with landowners, it's caught us in this trap.
So given that, I mean, is it a legislative issue that we can't actually?
So through the chair, I can't speak on those matters.
Well, it's a lot of money.
I think it's in everyone's best interest that you do good faith negotiations with the landowner before you go down to using the legislative options. That's the nuclear option.
I understand that, but I'm just meaning just changing the budgets and not being able to change because of timing of APs and long-term plans and things. We should be able to. I guess that's what you're doing now, really. But
So through the chair, that's correct. We're just trying to realign everything now.
Right. Okay. So just for the future, Mr. Chair, for quarterly reports. For quarterly reports, I don't really want to see any applications for funding. I think it needs to be a separate report. If I'm looking for this in the future, going back, I'm going to go, what was that about the Saxton additional money? I wouldn't think to look in the quarterly report. So I just think that for our governance purposes, it would be easier if we had a separate report if we're looking for extra funding. So that's my only comment.
So through the chair, I've just spoken to Mr. Levitas and scared the heck out of him, but I do.
I was actually concentrating on what you said.
So through the chair, I think that resolution probably does need tidied up a bit in terms of this. It isn't actually additional fund. The way that's written, it sounds like it's all additional funding. So I think if we actually put in brackets an additional 1.8 over the long-term plan or something like that, it's actually, when we go back and look at it, it'll make a lot more sense.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful. But for the future, yes, if we're seeking additional funding, I wouldn't want to see it in a quarterly report. I'd want it in a separate report, just for ease of looking back. Before you do that, Mr Chair, can we go back please to the, sorry to interrupt, just before you put it though, right at the beginning, the recommendation to receive the quarterly report and then notes an anticipated deferral of budget for the Awatea pump station, and we haven't even talked about that. Can we have a figure in there please of what that is? And maybe there was only one little piece in the report. It wasn't explained as fully as maybe I would like it to have been, but can we have an amount in there and maybe a commentary from the staff?
If you refer to point 6.8, Awatea pump station, it's detailed in there. On page 150. 150.
That's where I had seen it, but I just think if we have the figure in here, because again, when you're looking back as a governor, you're sort of looking for those quick catch-ups if you're looking for something in particular. So could we have the figure in there?
Chair, we can put the figure in there, yes.
The figures there, Councillor Noone, you happy with that?
Thank you. I think, yes, just looking back, look, it's just easier. Thank you very much. Appreciated.
You happy to move?
I'll do the first part, the 1 and 2 of the first part, receives the report. I'm not going to do the full lot. Still thinking about it.
All right. Well, we'll deal with some of the first, we'll do the first,
Just the recommendation.
the first page, top ones without the recommendation. So someone to move is Councillor Noone. Someone to second? Councillor Edgar. Any discussion, debate? Let the officers, they can make. There be none, I'll put it. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. I'll deal with the recommendation now. The recommendation to council is the 3 there. We'll deal with it as one block. I'm looking for someone to move. Councillor Sanderson. Seconder, Councillor Skinner. Any discussion or debate? Councillor Edgar. For or against?
Yeah, neutralish.
Sorry.
You'll understand as soon as I make my comments. Because this is going forward to council, I just think some of the concerns and comments we've raised, it would be good if they were in that recommendation report to council, because I think just for completeness of records, that would be really good.
So through the chair, there won't be another report to council. The recommendations go up to council for approval. There's no additional report.
Oh, it's not going to go to full council?
It goes to full council, but the recommendations go to full council.
But in your
Yes, over here.
commentary,
There's no commentary attached
There'll
to
be some comments in the minutes.
the minutes. In the minutes. The
Okay.
minutes will reflect the discussion, yes,
All right,
but not the
okay.
recommendation.
thank you.
Any other discussion, debate? There being none, I'm putting it. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. I think that does, we actually have concluded the ordinary part of the meeting. We're now going into a public excluded matter to deal with the recycling contract. Could I have a recommendation that, there's a recommendation that we exclude the public from the following parts of the meeting, the reasons given, commercial activities and with it to carry on commercial negotiations. Could I have someone to move that we move the public excluded? Councillor Edgar, seconded Councillor Neil Stevens. I'll put it, those in favour will say aye, against carried. Okay, we're now in public excluded. We will just give us a few moments to get things switched off and the doors closed.